What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Scott Proctor, joined as always by my guy Matt Moore. So we're back with another episode of Simple Question, but this time we'll have more than one because we got a special guest joining us today for the first time. She covers the Chicago Bulls for the Chicago Tribune. It's Julia Poe. Julia, thanks so much for joining us. How are we doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys so much for having me on.
Absolutely. It's a joy to have you. Let's hop right into things because let's start here. Donovan Mitchell dropped 71 points on the Bulls on Monday night, and it seems like this is indicative of the Bulls' larger problem. Seemingly every single game an opposing player is having a season best, a career best, in Donovan Mitchell's case, game against the Bulls. What do you attribute that to, the Bulls' larger defensive issues that we've been seeing through the first probably quarter of the season here?
Well, I think one of the most concerning things for the Bulls is that it's not just one thing. They have several very visible weaknesses on defense. The two that really pop out are that three-point defense. They've never been a strong perimeter defending team, but especially when they've got, any guy like Alex Caruso, even Ayo Dosunmu, if they're not on the court, they're just struggling at the three-point line. But then they're also struggling with keeping teams out of offensive rebounds. And when you have those two combos, if you're not beating the teams under the rim, you're also not beating them at the three-point line. You're just going to open yourself up for a scorer like Donovan Mitchell, who, to be fair, he's always had these big streaky games in his career. He's one heck of a scorer, but you're going to open up players like that to just be able to get hot. Once teams get hot from three-point range against the Bulls, they stay hot through the end of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Julia. And you mentioned Dosunmu, and also like another guy that I think of is like Patrick Williams. These young guys that are very important, not just defensively, but it seems like the Bulls are expecting a lot of them offensively. Is getting more out of those young guys one of the ways that the Bulls can kind of right this ship and start to trend in the right direction towards the trade deadline?
Definitely right. And I think, a lot of the positive defensive growth that you've seen from this team has been coming from the younger players, from Ayo, from Pat. I think the big problem, though, is that the defensive issues, it's not just one-on-one defense. They don't need, Patrick Williams to get better in the one-on-one. He's actually pretty damn good in those situations. Yeah. The main issue is the team defense. It's how they're guarding off ball. It's how they're handling mismatches, switches, screens. That's when the real breakdowns are coming. You have some of those really good moments of one-on-one defense, and then you'll just see it blown up after 20, 22 seconds by offensive rebound, put back shot, and then it's all over. So I think that's more where the breakdown is coming. It's not the initial one-on-one, it's everything that comes afterwards.
No doubt. And that's what makes it frustrating because, as you mentioned, like the Bulls have solid on-ball defenders like Caruso. Zach gets a lot of, mess for being, not a great defender, but he's a great on-ball defender. Most of his lapses come, in team defense and help defense. And obviously Patrick Williams is a great on-ball defender as well, but we're just not seeing enough evidence of that come up on the team side on the defensive end. But I want to talk about this and go here because there was a December 20 report from Shams in The Athletic basically saying that Zach LaVine in the front office aren't seeing eye to eye. Casey Johnson said this morning that Zach LaVine has privately questioned his role. What are you hearing about that, Julie, in terms of, Zach's place in the franchise, and why would he be questioning his role after just inking a massive contract extension this offseason?
Right. It seems really incongruous with that maximum deal that he signed in the offseason. But I think it is hard when you are a young star like Zach, who has proven himself in a lot of ways, but also still has to feel unproven in a lot of other ways when you're trying to share not just time, not just scoring, but also just kind of your role with DeMar DeRozan. You look at the guy that has the ball in his hands for those game-winning clutch shots, it is always DeMar DeRozan. And to be fair, it's often some type of kind of, screen action where Zach or DeMar could take the shot. Yeah. But 9 times out of 10, DeMar is the one taking the shot. And I think that's only one small piece of it. But when you look at the guy who is being expected to step up and to be the game winner for this team, it's clear that it's still DeMar, even though Zach is the max contract player. And I do think that could create, it's not necessarily that these guys, they like working together. You can tell they enjoy playing together, but that has to create some level of questions of, okay, what's my role if I'm not the guy, especially after having years of being the only guy for the Bulls before DeMar came along.
That's just so problematic to me, Julia, because as you mentioned, we know what type of player Zach LaVine is. And again, it's not that him and DeMar are beefing on a personal level, but what good team or what championship level team doesn't have two guys that you can go to late in games? Like, as a fan personally, I just wish Zach would just hopefully realize that and, kind of realize that he needs somebody like DeMar DeRozan or maybe even somebody better down the line to get to where he wants to get to as a team. But go ahead, Matt.
No, I mean, I want to kind of follow up on that. Is this more of how does this end up happening where DeMar does get the ball? Is it just the way the defenses are playing them? Is it how the coaches are calling the plays? Or is this actively DeMar kind of wants to be that guy still because he was that guy with other teams, and it's just trying to iron out how to be like a 1A, 1B sort of a situation?
Well, so obviously we're just kind of dealing with the situations that we've seen recently because this team is playing so many clutch games. Every single game feels like it's coming down to a buzzer beater. Yeah. And, when we're talking to Billy Donovan about those plays, at least the last few have been drawn up to go to DeMar as the primary option. I don't necessarily question that. His shooting percentage in the clutch is so strong. I think more of the issue. Yeah. I mean, it's just who else's hands are you going to put the ball into? Mm-hmm. But I think at the same time that can kind of build into if Zach's not taking game-winning shots, you're not going to know if he's making them or missing them because he's just simply plainly not taking them. I think the biggest issue for the Bulls would be maybe just don't get into so many buzzer beater situations.
That'd be nice.
As someone who has to write on deadline, I would love that. It would be really, really nice. But I think part of the issue is just that when you do have so many games coming down the line back to back, and this goes back earlier in the season to that time that Billy Donovan sat Zach at the end of a game when he wasn't making shots, and just fully took him out of the equation.
And rightfully so, I would add.
Exactly. That's one of those situations where, Zach's going to look at it as I can make a shot at any time, even if I've been missing all game. Billy's got to play his best players in a given night. But I think when you have this many games coming down to situations like that and Zach is never getting called on, it's not surprising that that's going to cause some level of wondering, okay, well, what am I supposed to do then here? Even if lots of times DeMar is winning those games or able to put them into those situations.
Yep. No doubt about it. It's going to be something to navigate. And as we see on the lower third here on the screen, obviously a lot is made of the duo that is Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan. But Nikola Vucevic is obviously, in many people's eyes, part of a big three there in Chicago. What do you make of this Bulls big three and their ability to kind of coexist at the highest level here moving forward? Because obviously there's been, trade rumors circulating about, one or two of those guys being shipped elsewhere.
Definitely. I mean, I think Vooch has finally figured out how to work in this team in a lot of ways. Yeah, that's been nice to see. I was in Orlando before I was in Chicago. I wasn't covering basketball down there, but I saw a lot of Vooch play, and he's, a really fun player to watch when he's in an environment where he's able to thrive. Mm-hmm. That's not what this team was for him last season, and I think that was a little tough for all Bulls fans to watch. He was taking a lot of heat because of that, but, his three-point numbers are back up. His rebounding numbers are about where you want them to be. He's able to work inside. He's able to work outside. I think they're getting to a good equilibrium with those three players. I think the concern for the Bulls is that it's still not enough to win games with any consistency. And a lot of that is coming down to defense. This is not necessarily a defensive-minded trio. They're a really good offensive trio. Yeah. So we're seeing those scoring numbers work, but they've got to figure out something to shore up the defense, whether that's acquisitions, whether it's just getting the guys to play better defense like they were in that first half against Cleveland. Because the scoring's there. They're putting up good numbers, but it's still not putting them into the win column nearly half as much as it should be.
Yeah, no doubt. And Julia, you mentioned the defensive woes, and you're absolutely right. This is an offensive big three for sure. And one of the things I think the Bulls actively tried to do to offset that is you go out and get guys like Caruso, Lonzo Ball, and obviously Ball is still out. How much of these issues that you're seeing with the Bulls stem from that loss of what was clearly their starting point guard? And if he's out indefinitely, and it might be for the entire season, what can the Bulls do to kind of, fill that role and find a way to make up for the loss of Lonzo Ball?
Yeah, first, it's just crazy that it's been a year now, basically, without being able to see Lonzo Ball play. That's just a loss as a basketball fan. I mean, it's just real. And again,
it's the fact that he's not even that he's on the court, but he's not even able to do like basketball activities still. And
there's no deadline on when we can actually get excited about him coming back.
Exactly. So that's been, obviously tough for the team. But I think, around this time last year when that injury happened early, I think it was really easy to look at it and say, okay, well, this is why the defense isn't doing well. This is why they're not shooting 3-pointers. At this point, it's very clear that's not the end-all, be-all of the issues with this team. This team, if you take a perfectly healthy Lonzo Ball, plug it back into this team, That's not fixing team defense. That's not magically making up for the 3-pointers that they're not taking. They're just not taking enough threes. It's not really even fixing a lot of the problems that they identified going into the offseason that they knew they needed to shore up with acquisitions. And I think that's kind of where it's a little mind-boggling sometimes, is looking at this team that knew they needed 3-point shooting, knew that they needed to, improve their rim protection, for instance. Those aren't things that Lonzo's going to come in and magically, he's not going to turn into Klay Thompson and just start, shooting 3-pointers left and right. He's probably one of the best point guards in the league when he's healthy, but he's not fixing any of those issues that they knew they had, regardless of whether they knew he wasn't going to be available for this much of the season. Just none of those fixes were made in the offseason. So it's now very obvious that teams know how to defend a lot and how to counter a lot of what the Bulls can do. Plugging Lonzo in is not just like this magical wand wave anymore. And I think it used to be a lot more comforting to fans, but now, obviously everyone wants to see him back. The Bulls will be a much more fun team when he's back, but that's not going to fix a lot of these issues.
Yeah. A lot of facts speaking there, Julia, no doubt about it. We're about a month out from the trade deadline here. What's your sense of whether the Bulls will kind of stand pat, no pun intended, or make a move, and if they do make a move, who do you think that would be surrounded by? Would it be Kobe White? Would it be Vooch or somebody else?
I think consistency has been such an emphasis of this team, for better or worse, for so long. They're definitely not in a position where they're going to blow things up like crazy. Like, that's not as much as people will call for it when they're having a bad streak. That, if I'm wrong on that, I will come back on it. But there is no sense that there is some big, crazy, trade coming in that sense. I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe smaller players moving, maybe make a couple moves here. But again, this is a team that knew that they had major issues in the offseason and did not make any major transactions. And I do think that being as locked up as they are in the situation with Lonzo, that hurts your ability to work, because you've got this guy on this big contract just sitting and you have no idea what to expect or what to do there. So I would not, from what we're seeing, it doesn't seem like this is a team that likes to make big swings, especially midseason. They didn't do it last year. They didn't do it in this offseason. And if they did, it would kind of almost take a step back on all of the things that they've been emphasizing, which is consistency, wanting to get Zach healthy and see what the team looks like with that, and wanting to develop their younger players. So, it's probably not as exciting as people would necessarily want to see, but this has been a team that has favored making gradual growth, at least over the last few years, over just wanting to, blow things up when they're not going as they would like them to go.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think all NBA fans want the big trade at the deadline. We get excited for that. But, going off of that, Julia, then what is the ceiling long-term for this Bulls roster? You talk about the consistency. They want to ride with this group, and they've worked a few years now to build this up to where it's at. What is the long-term, situation for this roster?
Yeah, I mean, where it sits right now, it's very clear that this team could be better than they are. Like, it's not as bad as it looks in the standings. And I think we've even seen some of that growth happening with, now that Zach LaVine is actually healthy, he is visibly playing better. His shooting is so much better in December than it was at the start of the year. If they can figure out the defense, this is a team that easily pops up over 500, gets into good standing, makes it into the play-in. That is very reasonable for where this roster is at. I think until they know one way or another what's going on with Lonzo, and until they're able to shore up the 3-point shooting and the defense, they're just going to have that kind of moderate ceiling. It's still a team that, even though they're much better against good teams, they're not going to be able to reliably compete against some of those top 3, top 4 teams in the playoffs. Like, that's just not where this team is at right now. And I think some of those changes have to be made with acquisitions, but some of them just have to be made with, a lot of these guys are better defenders than they're ending up looking. If you look at the first half versus Cleveland on Monday versus the second half, those are 2 completely different ball clubs with the same roster on the court. So this is a team that, again, it's not as bad as it looks. They could make a jump and kind of surprise people, but right now they just have not been able to consistently make that jump with what's even available to them. So that's kind of holding them back on that ceiling.
No doubt about it. Yeah, health is key, but yeah, the dudes on the court just have to play better, and we need some more consistency out of particularly, that starting unit, that top 8 in particular. I want to end here, Julia, because I just found this really weird, and I'm really curious, the insight that you have on this. The whole Billy Donovan extension that happened in the offseason that was reported 20 games into the season, and they said that we did it in the offseason, but it wasn't reported then. What was all that about? That kind of weird kind of, announcement that Billy Donovan was extended as the head coach of the Chicago Bulls? And also, too, what do you make of the job he's done this season and since he's taken over in Chicago?
Yeah, that was a little bit of a weird one to me as well, just because I think if you make that announcement when they made the extension, I think it would have gone over well.
Agreed.
Billy did a good job with the team last year. Managed I think it's really easy to forget how weird last season was with, the Omicron thing where like every single player was out, all the injuries. They still were able to get back into the playoffs. Billy's like a nice guy. He's, it would not have, it's not like he was universally disliked or that would have made some big wave that fans would have been. I think most fans would have looked at that and gone, okay, cool, continue on. When it did come out, though, was after all the Lonzo setbacks, when the team was not doing so well, and it almost put him in a worse position, which I just thought was a little bit of a strange move, just from their end of things. But I don't think it's necessarily I think it makes sense for where this team is at. I think a lot of the issues that the Bulls have right now are not necessarily coming down to coaching. A lack of three-point shooting is not, unless you want Billy to go out there and start shooting three-pointers. I mean, there's not a ton that he can do if he doesn't have shooters available to him. You can't turn most of these players, even, Ayo Dosunmu is taking way more three-pointers. Even if that's happening, that's not going to turn him into a three-point specialist overnight. So I think it made sense, but the way that they went about it, it almost felt like it was setting Billy up to not necessarily fail, but it definitely did not come across the way that you would want it to come across if you're proud and happy and excited to have, your head coach coming back for a few years. So that was a little bit of an oddity, but that kind of thing happens, more maybe than teams would like, but that does happen here and there.
No doubt. Yeah, it was just weird. I appreciate the insight there. It was just weird to me because, again, like you said, if it would have just announced it when it happened, I don't think anybody would have batted an eye even. Because, again, you're coming off a playoff berth. You're coming off a win in the playoffs, too, on the road, a pretty big Game 2 win over the Milwaukee Bucks in Milwaukee. So, I mean, I feel like that wouldn't have, been too big of crazy news it did in the offseason. But it was just weird, the timing of it when they announced it. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. The Bulls have plenty of more season, obviously, left to play and to change the thoughts surrounding their team. That's going to do it for us for episode A Simple Question. For your boy Scott Proctor, for Matt Morris and Julia Pope. Go follow her great work on Twitter. But we'll catch you next time. That's the question.
Thanks for watching. Feel free to check out our other videos and don't forget to smack that subscribe button down below while you're at it. Also, for more great and original content, head right over to bvmsports.com.